Good evening and welcome to DTV, the Democratic television here in Knox County. Last March, we presented a program on the then pending decision to outsource facility, maintenance, and janitorial work at the University of Tennessee. Since then, here on the Knoxville campus, Chancellor Beverly Davenport opted out of that proposal to outsource these essential functions. The Chancellor took a long time to make this decision, and she carefully weighed all the evidence. She met with members of the Haslam administration, faculty, students, affected workers, and members of the broader Knoxville community. Nonetheless, questions have now been raised as to the wisdom of her decision. We believe this criticism to be misplaced and indeed unfair. We think it was a responsible decision, both in the short-term and the long-term interests of the university. Its faculty, its workforce, Tennessee taxpayers, very important, and most importantly, its students. It is a decision clearly supported by the evidence. The presentation on March 10 summarizes why we think Chancellor Davenport's decision was right on target. Here is what we had to say 8 months ago. Good evening, friends, and welcome once again to DTV, the Democratic voice on community television here in East Tennessee. Tonight, we will examine one of the most critical and impending issues facing the citizens of Tennessee, Governor Haslam's proposal to outsource and privatize the management of people-owned properties to private profit-making enterprises located outside of Tennessee. That is why the people of all sorts and all political persuasions are crying out, Tennessee is not for sale. Now, our guests this evening are uniquely able to throw some light on what the governor is proposing and what you could do about it. Tom Anderson works in facilities on the UT campus here in Knoxville, and John Shefner is a member of the university's Department of Sociology. Both Tom and John are active and, I must say, outspoken members of the UTK chapter of United Campus Workers, which is the statewide voice of working men and women in Tennessee's system of higher education. Tom, John, welcome to DTV.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Now, this proposal by the governor has been deliberately kept below the radar. Most Tennesseans have no idea at all what's being proposed. John, how about a brief summary of what in heaven's name is going on?
So what's going on with the governor's privatization plan is part of the degradation of the U.S. workforce, which began privately with the deindustrialization process and how so many jobs have been hurt in that way. Outsourcing is one, or privatization especially, is one of the methods that governments can diminish public jobs. This process by Governor Haslam began 18 months ago, and he's trying to privatize facilities workforce in higher education and in state parks across the state. There's been months of opposition, whether it's been challenges by state workers, whether it's been the submitting of freedom of information requests for information by United Campus Workers, and it's also been by legislator challenges in hearings and in print. It's not clear really who is in favor of this privatization process other than the governor and his executive branch, which has gone really behind the scenes time and time again in a totally untransparent process to try and make these jobs someone else's.
Now I should have mentioned this at the outset. You'll notice on your screen we have a Twitter address, or whatever they call it, at DTV Knox 1. So if anyone who's watching is overcome with emotion and wants to be in touch with us, you can send us a tweet. It's very fashionable these days, and we'll do our best to answer whatever you ask us. Tom, okay, what's the status? What's the outlook? Where are we?
Right. Well, in a very real way, we're kind of coming to the 11th hour. This has been going on since August of 2015, which is when we broke the story, when we found out about it. The bid process is coming to a close. All of the proposals by the three final companies, which have not been announced, part of the secretive nature of it, all of those proposals are in, and they are now being scored and reviewed by the committee. The schedule has an announcement of who their intent to award. The winning bidder would be at the end of this month, on the 28th.
The end of this month.
The end of this month. And then they've got most of the month of April to work out a contract with a contract signing date of by April 28th.
Okay. We've got it seems to me viewers and all Tennesseans have a right to know how this has been analyzed. We have a scorecard of checks and balances, and if we want to get that up on the screen, we'll run through that. A couple of there you go. It's our scorecard, and can you read what it says?
It's a little small from here, but I mean, it boils down to this entire process has been entirely secret. There has been no public comment. There is no legislative oversight. The entire process, all of the meetings have been closed. They're not open to the public.
Has there been an economic analysis made of the impact?
There has not. The governor and the Terry Cowles, the department that is pushing this, has often referred to what they call a craft CPA report. But it was not an audit. It was really just a process where an accountant added up the numbers that they were handed and basically said, yes, 2 and 2 does in fact equal 4. There was no comparison of service levels or work that actually gets done, investment. There is no process studies, so no audit, no review's been done.
So it was very superficial.
Oh yeah, extremely superficial, and it was done by a company, Craft CPA, which has actually invested directly in both of Governor Haslam's campaigns.
And the entities that have been involved, or the entities that are focused on, such as the University of Tennessee, they were involved only at the very beginning. So, for example, when University of Tennessee officials started to ask crucial and critical questions on the committee that was created to examine the process, all of a sudden, strangely enough, they were not invited back. So critical voices have been kept out of it. There's been a whole series of efforts that have privileged multinational corporations like Jones Lang LaSalle, Compass, and Aramark, all of whom have pretty bad records when it comes to serving public needs.
Now, I mean, there are several dimensions that you can look at this. You can look at it from the point of view of these are, say, take Fall Creek Falls. Fall Creek Falls, it's being proposed that Fall Creek Falls, as we know it, is being ripped down and is going to be rebuilt. And the state is going to pay for all of that, and then they're going to turn the whole thing over to a private company to run and make the profits off of Fall Creek Falls. So what has traditionally been a family-friendly, inexpensive, accessible, beautiful state park is about to undergo a significant renovation that may or may not, and very likely won't, maintain that family-friendly atmosphere. The funds that generated from it are not going to go back to the people of Tennessee. They're going to be going to the companies in outside of Tennessee, whoever wins that contract. If we could get there we go, we're back, hi. Now, so that's a real concern, and that's true whether we're talking about Fall Creek Falls or whether we're talking about the maintenance and the operation of the UTK campus and the other campuses of higher education here in the state.
Right, right. And one of the points on here is public input, and there really hasn't been very much public input. They've worked very hard to keep the public out of it. There were two very brief public comment periods that they worked very hard not to advertise. United Campus Workers put the word out, and we tried to get it out as much as possible. And there was out of 800 comments, public comments that were made from all across the state. Only one was in favor of outsourcing, and that was by Michelle Martin, who made the first comment, and she's the communications person in charge of pushing this effort. So what little public comment there has been entirely against outsourcing.
Right. So there's the issue of the what's going to happen to these people-owned resources. There's also the issue of what is going to happen to the workers who are associated with these resources, and there is obvious concern that only bad things are likely to happen. Now, the governor and his folks have been saying, no, not to worry. They say every worker will be given an opportunity to keep their job. Now, what does that really mean?
Well, it means a few things that are not necessarily true. So first of all, not every worker for facilities across the state are full-time workers. Part-time workers will not be offered this kind of protection. There's also the attrition process, right? So in outsourcing efforts, there's a real effort to push people off so that the newer workers will be subjected to less pay, to less amounts of benefit. All of those kinds of issues are really part of how money is saved. There's really all the audits that have been internally done show that at the University of Tennessee, at campuses statewide, the work is done well and at a really effective price point. So the only way to make money is to diminish workers' pay, benefit, and security. So this notion that people will in fact be protected and will keep their jobs, it's not the way outsourcing works. It may be what they say is how it works. That's not what's going to happen.
Now, there's also the question of every worker will keep their benefits.
Right. And the job protections and the benefit protections are really an empty promise. I've read through the RFP, the request for proposal, which the contract will be based on pretty thoroughly. As a facilities worker, I'll be directly affected. So, like the idea that workers will keep their job is empty in that there's a 50-mile radius. So you're not actually promised or guaranteed to be offered your own current job. They can offer you any job within 50 miles. Benefits are an equal empty promise. There are actually no benefits that are directly and specifically protected. They use what they're calling total equitable compensation, which is some mysterious combination of pay in lieu of benefits. So if the winning company decides they don't want to offer, say, paid time off, annual leave, or any of that kind of thing, then they can just offer you another few cents or $1 an hour and call it even. That's true for insurance benefits. If their insurance benefits, assuming that you'll get them, aren't up to snuff, then they can compensate that with a few dollars. But there are no benefits that are specifically protected.
Yeah, none.
None. In fact, paid time off is not mentioned in any way at all. And the state has confirmed that sick leave that current employees have will just disappear. The new company will not be expected to honor it, and the state will not pay it out.
Right.
And one of the things to add is that according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Tennessee has the highest proportion of low-paid jobs in the United States. And so what this kind of effort will do is just diminish the number of good jobs in Tennessee. So what you're going to do is you're going to end up not only impoverishing individuals and families, but communities as well, all of which depend on good jobs.
Now, a conservative columnist for the News Sentinel, Frank Hagel, I'm sure many of the viewers who read Frank's weekly column, made the observation that if you're going to pay the people the same, if you're not going to cut back on their benefits, and you're going to keep everything the way it is today, but the company is also going to make a profit for its stockholders, that nothing like that has ever been performed since, as Frank said, the Lord fed a gathering of thousands with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes, and those were Frank's words, but they made the point. Now, the other thing, of course, that is said is that longtime public servants shouldn't worry about their jobs.
So I think this is really important to think about from a variety of standpoints. This is longstanding public service. These are people who are committed to the places where they work, whether they're state parks or universities or community colleges. They're people that are relied on by others who work there, who study there, who vacation there. They're the people who know the ins and outs of all the pieces that need fixing or working on or maintaining. They're people who are loyal to the base of visitors or students or faculty. And all of this is going to diminish if you get a workforce that we are not in turn loyal to.
Right. And here today and gone tomorrow. Whereas today you have hundreds and hundreds of workers at UT who have been there their entire careers,
Right.
and are loyal to the institution. They know it inside and out.
That's right.
And they do a great job.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually, in facilities at UTK, we have multiple generations.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
So
fathers
anyway,
and sons and daughters.
moving right along, this is not the first time this has come up. And in fact, a few years ago, all of the housekeeping functions at UTK were indeed turned over to a public sector company and outsourced. So what happened when that was done? That would be, seems to me, qualifies as a good trial run for this current proposal. What was the result there?
Well, what happened is Chancellor Cheek brought him back in-house. And he brought him back in-house because the work was not being done well. He brought it back in-house because there were a variety of complaints, because there were a variety of needs that were not being fulfilled, and the work wasn't done well. It's a perfect predictor of what could happen if indeed these jobs are privatized.
Right. It also didn't save money. You know, it in the long run, it regularly costs the university more money to outsource through material costs, through poor work and repeat work, and for public employees having to go behind and finish work that isn't done by the private contractor.
So the claim is made that this is going to save a lot of money for the taxpayers of Tennessee, and that's the justification for it. There is some kind of an assumption that by definition the private sector is always more efficient and cost-effective than the public sector. There are, of course, countless examples where that is not the case, and many people believe it would not be the case here, and in fact it would be exactly moving in the other direction. So
I'd like to speak to that. I mean, and it's something that I hear a lot. I've been a public employee for 15 years in facilities. I work as a buyer, so I purchase materials and goods to support campus. And I find it kind of amazing that that people talk about how private sector, a for-profit sector, is better at saving money than public employees. When in reality, I think there is probably no one better at getting the most for the public's tax dollar than public employees, because there's no profit motive. You know, every dollar we get, we invest into the campus in some way. You know, I buy replacement parts for pumps and HVAC units all across campus for all the buildings, and we maintain and repair equipment for absolutely as long as we can, and make sure that it stays in top working condition so we get the best bang out of our buck, so to speak, so we don't have to keep replacing things. You know, if you cut corners and buy cheap equipment, you just end up repairing it more and replacing it. So it
And
costs
costing
you more money in
more.
the long run.
Absolutely. It almost always does.
I think there's another piece to be asked here too, and that is, I think one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves in this country and this state is, what's a job for, right? And I think a job's for a lot of things. A job is for dignity and self-respect of the person who holds it and the family she or he supports. A job is to help provide the life of a community. A job is to help provide social gain for that family, for that community, for that individual. A job is not always to gather massive amounts of profit for a multinational corporation that has no place in the community, that has no loyalty to the community, that has no history or tradition with the community. Jobs are for families and people and communities. And I think that this is one of the things that we've absolutely gotten away from if we ever really focused enough on it. And it's time to refocus, at least in part. One of the main proponents of Governor Haslam's plan, Larry Martin, was quoted as saying that there's an intellectual and moral obligation to examine cost savings. But I think that there's really a moral obligation to working people in this state as well, and I think that they're absolutely violating it.
Well said. And these days it's all too easy just to gloss over those community roots that are built and that come back and repay the taxpayers of Tennessee many times over by the quality of service that is maintained and by the contribution that these workers make to the community themselves. They have a stake in the community. They have a stake in the university, and that is a very valuable commodity. Right. The point is, we don't even know if it's going to save any money, because initially, and even to this moment, the kind of analysis that would really demonstrate that have not been done.
Right.
Have not been done. And so people are flying blind. Now, the other thing I think everyone should be aware of is the Tennessee legislature, bless them, have had almost no hand in any of this. They haven't had hearings. They haven't voted on anything. They just are sort of bystanders and observers like all the rest of us. And but Senator Briggs, who I think is doing a terrific job, and I will say that on this Democratic program, even though Senator Briggs is a Republican, he's speaking out on this issue in a way that is commendable. And what did Senator Briggs have to say?
Well, Senator Briggs, certainly I'll agree with you, has been one of our strongest champions in this fight. He drafted a letter that was essentially an open letter to President DiPietro, and it was a statement of support. There were 20 co-signers onto that letter. 16 of them, I believe, were Republicans.
These are members of the legislature who signed the letter.
Right. These are all state senators and representatives. And it raised the serious questions that they have. The fact that there was no economic impact study done, that there's been no real evidence that this would do what the state claims it would do, that the process has been entirely dark. In fact, legislators have been cut out of the process. There were presentations made by companies in the narrowing and just recently in their proposals, and our elected representatives were told they were not welcome. They were not allowed into those presentations. Our legislator, they have done what they could. So the Senate Finance Committee held a couple of hearings, and there have been a few hearings and a subcommittee on oversight where they asked a lot of questions, but that's really all they can do, is raise questions.
And I think the thing folks should focus on, this is not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. This is a Tennessee issue. There are state employees affected by this proposal in every legislative district in the state. A substantial majority of those legislative districts are represented by Republicans. And so if anything, the Republican legislators should be very concerned about this because it's their constituents who are going to suffer.
So there's a couple of additional pieces too that are important to emphasize as well. So Senator Briggs has absolutely been heroic and bold in what he's been trying to do. But he's really shoveling against a particular tide of lack of information. We've been in this fight for 18 months. What we have heard from particular legislators is that they actually have heard less this legislative season than they heard the previous legislative season about what's going on. Another piece is that Tom mentioned the Senator Briggs letter to Dr. DiPietro. There is the assumption that there will be an option to opt out by local universities and local state parks. This is what the governor has said time and again. But the diminishing of information makes it much harder for individual groups or places to opt out on the one hand, and you have to wonder how much pressure is being exerted behind the scenes on the local universities, the local community colleges, and the state parks to stay within the state desire, or I should say the governor's desire.
Right, right. And I mean, we got to remember that each and every one of those departments that has the option to opt out then has to go to the governor and get their budget for the next year.
Right.
And the opt-out option, it's nowhere codified. It isn't written down. There's no process. Nobody knows exactly how it's going to go. So it appears that it's really just a negotiation, a forced negotiation.
I should tip my hat to the United Campus Workers, because without their persistence on this matter, almost nothing would be known about it. There was the secret meeting 2 weeks ago in Nashville, which was not advertised in any way, but the United Campus Workers, being a very creative group, found out where the meeting was and organized buses from across the state to go to Nashville and to be a presence. And I was one of those who jumped on the bus. John did too. And there was visiting in congressional offices and in office after office. We all had the reaction from legislators, both Democratic and Republican, saying, you know, really? I didn't know that. Are you serious? Is this seriously what's happening? And we would say, yes, it's serious. It's seriously what's happening. And they say, well, we better look into this. Well, one hopes that they will, but it's clear up to this point they haven't been able to because the process has been deliberately and consciously kept below the radar.
Right.
And the question then is why? If it was such a great process, why is it being hidden from everybody?
Right. Right.
So we're coming up to the decision point. There are a lot of concerns that we've been talking about this evening. We hope that the vast audience watching this program, and we know you're all out there, would like to say, well, what can we do about this? Right. So let me speak on their behalf. What can our viewers do about it? What can citizens do about it?
So definitely reach out to your legislators and tell them you're against outsourcing. Definitely write to and contact in other ways the local administrators of your colleges, universities, and state parks. Definitely go to that handy dandy sign right behind us as a Facebook page, Tennessee is Not for Sale. Get in touch with us through that campaign and we will put you to work and tell you what else needs to be done to speak out against the governor's outsourcing plan. What have I forgotten?
I think in contacting legislators and telling them that you're against outsourcing, an important aspect of that is the knowledge that there is currently no legislative check and balance against the governor's plan, and that is something that we need to do, that the legislature needs to enact, not just for this, but for future efforts to privatize, because this isn't going to go away.
This is not a good decision, and we need to recognize that fact. And do you know what? Another half hour has just shot by, and so my thanks to Tom Anderson and John Shefner for this overview of what is about to happen in Tennessee if the people of Tennessee are not heard loud and clear. So speak up and tune into Democratic television next week, because we're going to focus on a very controversial issue: gun control, guns on campus. Good night.